I will be moderating today's talk. As most of you will be knowing, we are a precision oncology laboratory based out of Bangalore in India. It's been our endeavor to bring together clinicians, academia, and scientists pursuing precision oncology on a common platform. In pursuance to that, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the 7th edition of the Precision Oncology Asia Series talk. Now, as we all know, treatment with immune checkpoint inhibitors targeting programmed cell death protein PD1 or its ligand PDL1 can generate durable responses in various cancer types. The use of predictive markers for response to PD1, PDL1 inhibitors is critical for patient selection. While expression of PDL1 has demonstrated utility in patient selection, two other markers, tumor mutation burden and MSI, that is microsatellite instability, are emerging markers in this direction. This is the topic for today's talk, which is titled Clinical Implications of Emerging Immune Response Markers, TMB and MSI. To deliver the talk, I am pleased to welcome Dr. Vineet Govinda Gupta. Dr. Gupta is the consultant of medical oncology and co-head of medical oncology of Unit 2 at Artemis Hospital, Gurugram, NCR. With more than a decade of experience, he is currently also the section editor of Indian Journal of Medical and Pediatric Oncology. Dr. Gupta has a gold medal for Best Outgoing Medical Oncologist from the prestigious All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. He is actively involved in teaching programs for DM and DNB students. He is also a highly published researcher in various reputed national and international journals and winner of SIOP Young Investigator Award. Dr. Vineet Gupta has special interest in immunotherapy and targeted therapies. I will now request Dr. Vineet Gupta to begin the talk, which will be followed by the Q&A session. Over to you, Dr. Vineet Gupta.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Srinivasan. I think we'll start. I'm just going to share my slides. I hope this is visible.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
So, good evening to everybody. So, today's presentation is on the topic of clinical implications of emerging immune response markers, MSI and TMB. So, like it was just discussed in the introduction, these are two new biomarkers which have captured a lot of interest in last few years, and I think it is a process which has just started. I hope to convince you during this presentation why these markers are important and why whatever has been done so far is only just the beginning, and a lot of big things are coming forward. So we'll discuss all these topics one by one. So let us start with microsatellite instability. So first of all, one question which students might have is what is meant by microsatellites? So microsatellites are short tandem repeats or simple sequence repeats. So these are all the same terms. So they are small DNA motifs, which is 1 to 6 base pairs, which are repeated 5 to 50 times, which are located all over the genome. So they can be in non-coding region where they are not part of any protein, or they can be as part of protein or coding regions. So for example, one microsatellite could be the one which is shown where there are two base pairs CA, which are repeated again and again, or another one where 3, that is ATG, which are repeated again and again. What about mismatch repair? So mismatch repair is a DNA repair mechanism. So out of various DNA repair mechanisms, this is one important one which corrects insertion and deletion errors within fresh DNA strands. So what that means is, suppose there is a new DNA polymerization event and one new DNA strand is formed from a template, like you can see from the drawing, and there is a mismatch. So you can see here that in the middle, the T is matched to a G, where actually the T should be matched to an A. And these errors naturally arise as part of DNA replication. And what happens in mismatch repair is in the fresh DNA strand, there's a set of mismatch repair proteins which bind to the DNA strand, excise the wrong codon from the new DNA. So the protein knows that what is the template strand because it is methylated, and it is replaced with a short fragment of correct nucleotide by DNA polymerase and sealed with DNA ligase. So this is the mismatch repair process. So what happens is this process can get disrupted in what is known as defective mismatch repair. So what happens is that there is a loss of proper mismatch repair due to defect in one or more proteins involved. This process can be germline, for example, Lynch syndrome, that is, it can be an inherited defect in the mismatch repair pathway, or it could be somatic. So it could be part of the carcinogenesis process and be present just in the tumor, not in the germline. So most important gene a lot of us know are MLH1, MSH2, MSH6 and PMS2. Also, there's a protein called EpCAM, which inactivates sorry, 1 second. So there is a protein called EpCAM which inactivates MISH2 by promoter methylation. So what results
screen
is
is not visible. Sorry, so screen is not visible.
okay. One second. I'll just share it again. Is it visible now?
Yeah.
Okay. So the result of defective mismatch repair is that there is widespread mutation throughout the genome, and this manifests as microsatellite instability. So microsatellite instability is a phenotypic consequence of the genomic damage, which is defective mismatch repair, and it is detectable as it indulges in microsatellite region, leading to change in the length of microsatellite. So the stable length of microsatellite becomes unstable. That is why it is called microsatellite instability. So what happens when there is defective MMR? So these three things happen when MMR is defective. One is the patient becomes microsatellite instability high. That is, there is a phenotypic abnormality which you can detect by doing tests. In that, the microsatellite lengths are become variable or unstable. Second, it leads to carcinogenesis because when there are mutation occurring throughout the genome, it can inactivate tumor suppressor genes and activate oncogenes. The net result is carcinogenesis. So, for example, a lot of us might be knowing that there is a genetic syndrome called Lynch syndrome, which is an inherited cancer susceptibility syndrome, where the mismatch repair protein is missing from birth. It can also be acquired, example, 15% colon cancer, and the percentage varies by tumor, but it leads to special phenotypic features of the tumor. So it varies from cancer type to cancer type. For example, MMR defective colon cancer is usually proximal colon, poorly differentiated, early stage, resistant to fluoropyrimidines, and has a better prognosis. So it varies from tumor type to tumor type. So a lot of this is still under study, but colon cancer, the implication of DMMR are well characterized. And very important, it makes the tumor immunosensitive. By widespread mutation lead to widespread change in cancer protein or cancer neoantigen. So what happens is that when the proteins of the cancer cell change, they are recognized as foreign by the immune system, which makes it more sensitive to be killed by anti-cancer immunity, which is reflected by high immunosensitivity. So this is the same thing in graphical format. So the initial event of defective MMR leads to widespread mutation in genome, which leads to a MSI high phenotype. Mutation of critical genes involved in cellular growth and proliferation lead to carcinogenesis and increased TMB. So just keep this in the back of your mind. We will discuss TMB in a lot of detail ahead, which in turn lead to tumor neoantigens, which leads to immunosensitivity. So how is MSI diagnosed? We can do IHC for MMR genes to identify defective MMR. So you can see that you can do IHC for these proteins within the nucleus, and lack of these genes is manifested by a lack of staining inside the nucleus on IHC. So in this figure, there are two genes which are expressed in the nucleus and two genes which are not expressed, and which is visible on IHC. We can do PCR for MSI. So PCR is the gold standard for MSI testing, at least for the time being. And what they do is they amplify a standard panel of DNA sequences. Usually they use single and dual nucleotide repeats, and this identifies MSI-H phenotype. So it is the standard to which new methods have to be compared. And of course, there is NGS, which has come up a lot recently. And the benefit of NGS are multiple. One, it can simultaneously detect MSI in up to 100 loci. So PCR generally uses a panel of around 5 microsatellite sites, but NGS can use even 100 sites at the same time. It is validated in many genomic panels for high sensitivity and specificity. The both numbers vary from 90 to 95%. And one good thing about NGS is, since especially in context of somatic tumor DNA testing, you can look at the gene mutations as well as MSI as well as TMB in one go, which actually saves cost when it is done at scale. So likely NGS is the future for microsatellite testing in cancer genomes. What about prevalence? So this is common question which comes into discussion many times. That how common is MSI in various tumors? And even when you tell the patient ki we can do MSI to look for this marker, patients also ask this question, ki, sir, how common? What is the chance that I am MSI positive? So you can see the incidence, and what they have done is they have looked into the cancer genome atlas and looked at the prevalence of MSI in various genome types. So highest incidence is uterine and endometrial carcinoma. It is more than 25%. But more than 15% is seen in colon and gastric cancer, 4 to 6% in rectal and adrenal cancer, 2 to 4% in cervical, uterine carcinosarcoma, Wilms tumor and mesothelioma, and 1 to 2% in esophagus, breast, kidney, ovarian, cholangiocarcinoma. So you can see less than 1%, there's a lot of tumors, but these are the main tumors where the incidence is higher than 1%. So what is the rationale for immunosensitivity of dMMR or MSI high tumors? There is microsatellite instability leads to a hypermutated phenotype, which leads to generation of tumor neoantigens, which are recognized by the immune system, which putatively leads to high response to immuno-oncology drugs. So moving forward, I will discuss the clinical data where where MMR deranged or MSI high tumors have been treated with immuno-oncology drugs and what kind of result we can expect. So let us talk about these one by one. So first, let's talk about trials where they have taken dMMR or MSI high tumors in the relapsed and refractory setting, and specifically talking about colorectal cancer, first of all. So this was the first study published in NEJM in 2015, which actually there have been smaller case reports and preclinical study, but this was a study, first prospective, well-defined study where they have looked at PD-1 blockade in tumor with mismatch repair deficiency. And what they have done is they have taken patients, mainly colorectal cancer patients, who are mismatch repair deficient, and they have treated these patients with single agent pembrolizumab. And this is the kind of response they have got. So if you look at the plot to the left, you can see the below zero, these are the tumors which have responded, and above zero, these are tumors which have not responded. And you can see that the red lines are mismatch repair proficient colorectal cancer. That is, patients who are MSI, who are not MSI high, and almost all of these patients have failed to respond to Keytruda, and the tumors have progressed. While almost every tumor which has got mismatch repair deficiency, other than few, have responded, and the tumor and the net tumor marker level has approached zero over the next 30 to 50 days. If you look at the radiographic response, which is the waterfall plot, again you can see that the black and blue squares, which are the MSI positive tumors, almost all of these patients responded to the immunotherapy, while the patients who were mismatch repair proficient, majority of them, did not respond. Presented in graphical form, they saw that if we took mismatch deficient colorectal cancer, 10 patients, and mismatch proficient colorectal cancer, 40% patient developed a partial response, 50% developed stable disease. So a net 12-week disease control rate of 90% with pembrolizumab in mismatch repair deficient colorectal cancer, while the same figure is 0% response and 11% stable disease for mismatch proficient tumor. And the median duration of response is very long, not reached, and the median time to response important. It takes time to get a response. So the median time to response is 28 weeks. For mismatch repair deficient non-colorectal cancer also they have discussed the data. So they had 57% partial response rate, and at 12 weeks, 70% had a disease control with a median time to response of 12 weeks. So it shows that the mismatch repair deficient tumors have a very gratifying response. 90% disease control in patients with refractory colon cancer is not to be scoffed at. And good thing about immunotherapy drugs is that they have low toxicity. So in this study, they reported a 41% grade 3 or higher toxicity. They have not reported the drug-related toxicity separately. But if we look at the common drug-related toxicity, it is only around 12% grade 3 or higher drug-related toxicity in this study. That is pneumonitis, diarrhea, and transaminitis, meaning that it is a low toxicity intervention. So on the heels of this, there was a similar study for another PD-1 blocker, that is nivolumab. So in the CheckMate 142 study, there are two arms in this study. One arm has nivolumab, so they have taken metastatic or recurrent colorectal cancer, which is dMMR or MSI high, with at least one previous line of therapy. So it is the relapse setting. The monotherapy arm has used only nivolumab, and the combination arm has used nivolumab plus ipilimumab. So if it's for people who don't know, ipilimumab is a CTLA4 blocker, which targets a different checkpoint from the PD-1 checkpoint. And they have presented, so the first study is the presentation of the monotherapy arm. And just to give you an idea of what kind of patient population this is, more than 50% had previously received more than 3 lines of treatment. And in fact, more than 84% of patients have received more than 2 lines of treatment. So they are heavily treated patients who have received all kind of therapy. Around 40% are BRAF and KRAS wild type, while others have got BRAF or KRAS mutation. The tumor PD-L1 expression more than 1% is around 28%, and around 1/3 of patients had known history of Lynch syndrome. So this was the data which they published. Our response rate of 31% by investigator and 32% by central review. And if you look at the disease control rate at 12 weeks, the disease control rate at 12 weeks in the study is 64% by central review. So one more thing they have done is they have looked at only those patients who are MSI positive also by central review. And in this population, the response rate, the disease control rate at 12 weeks is actually 70%. And you can see again the plot is quite gratifying. But one very useful thing about immunotherapy has been in all studies is that the response is durable. So you can see here, this is the progression-free survival curve, and you can see that a very nice plateau appears around the 12-month, 1 year mark. And what they found is that among patients who responded, almost everybody had durable disease remission. Only 3 responders expressed progression, all others remained in remission. In fact, the median progression-free survival was 14.3 months, which is much higher than what usually you will get with chemotherapy. And 12-month overall survival was 73%. Toxicity, so they have described drug-related grade 3, and they have found 20% grade 3 adverse events in this population, with 7% transaminitis, colitis, AKI, duodenal ulcer, and stomatitis, 11% increased amylase or lipase, so biochemical grade 3, and 1 patient each of adrenal insufficiency or arthritis. So overall, a very well tolerated regimen. Actually, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Other than biochemical, only 8 patients had grade 3 or higher clinical adverse event. So the nivolumab ipilimumab combination arm has also been published in 2017, and what they have, it is the same population, MSI positive colorectal cancer, and they have received combination of nivolumab 3 mg per kg and ipilimumab 1 mg per kg. Ipilimumab given for 4 doses and then stopped. And so what this study showed is actually the most impressive data out of all studies so far. And again, you can see it is a heavily treated population. The baseline characteristics are similar to the previous study. And you can see the very, very high disease control rate. In fact, in this study, 80% of patients had disease control for more than 12 weeks. And you can see the PFS curve. So you can see that the majority of patients, in fact, the median PFS is not reached, and the majority of patients have flattened the curve by 12 months, and which can also be seen in the overall survival. So 3% complete remission, 51% partial remission, and 31% stable disease. Very, very impressive numbers. And I think this regimen, with when we do a phase 3 trial, it may well become a future frontline regimen in this setting. I will discuss the data ahead. So treatment related, so it is little bit more toxic than nivolumab alone. You can see around 27% risk of grade 3 treatment related adverse events, including diarrhea, fatigue, pruritus, transaminitis, hypothyroidism, nausea, and rash. So we all know that diarrhea is more common with ipilimumab compared to PD-1 checkpoint blockade alone. So similar, slightly higher toxicity was seen in this study, and 5% grade 4 treatment related adverse events. So what is the conclusion? In advanced relapsed refractory colorectal cancer with dMMR or MSI high, these 3 options are there. All of them give high disease control rate ranging from 70 to 90%, durable PFS ranging from 14 months to not reached, and long-term survival. So it is very important in the metastatic setting, where normally we say colorectal cancer has a median survival of 2 to 3 years. You can achieve long-term survival with a simple intervention with very low side effects. So what about frontline therapy? So the obvious question is that if relapse refractory, the results are so good, why don't we start with immunotherapy? It is a good regimen, it produces long-term survival, and it does not have a lot of side effects. So it is logical that we should give it before chemo. And in fact, this randomized trial has been completed. And what they have presented is, although the survival analysis is still going on, they have presented unprecedented results in colorectal cancer with pembrolizumab in MSI high advanced tumors. So what they have done in this study is they have taken treatment naive patients, which are either DMMR by IHC or MSI high by PCR, and they are with who are fit, and they have randomized them to pembrolizumab every 3 weekly for 2 years, or choice of therapy. So usually these patients have got Folfox or Folfiri with or without bevacizumab or cetuximab by choice of the investigator. Of course, the molecular testing had been done. And patient who progressed were allowed to cross over. So this is very important. If somebody got chemotherapy in the first line and failed chemotherapy, they were allowed to cross over to pembrolizumab to get it in the second line. So it has important implications for survival analysis. And they have taken PFS and OS both as the primary endpoint, and the data cutoff of February 29, 2020. And this is the data. So it is a really a spectacular graph. You can see that in the initial few months, chemotherapy seems to be coming out ahead because immunotherapy takes some time to work. In general, we say that the benefit of immunotherapy takes around 2 months to show. And immediately after that, the immunotherapy curve immediately tapers off. So you can say that you can see that the graph cross, and after around 12 months, there seemed to be a prolonged plateau, and very few patients seem to be progressing. So the hazard ratio for progression or death is 0.6, while for chemotherapy there is a continuous fall in the curve, and the patients gradually keep progressing over time. So efficacy 43.8% overall response rate versus 33. So it is more efficacious than chemotherapy in terms of response rate, 70% disease control rate. 83% of responses in the pembrolizumab arm are still ongoing at 2 years. The overall survival data is immature. And if you look at the subgroups, you will see that almost every subgroup does better with immunotherapy compared to chemotherapy, with the exception of KRAS or NRAS mutant tumors. So in terms of PFS, so we will have to look into this. It might be that these particular tumors, they do poorly with both chemotherapy and immunotherapy. But I think the overall survival benefit may shed some light on this picture, how the patient behaved in the second line setting. I think that will answer some questions. What about safety parameters? The important thing is grade 3 or higher treatment related adverse effects, as seen in the previous study. It is 22% in pembrolizumab and 66%. So it is less toxic than chemotherapy, and even immune mediated side effects, grade 3 or higher, immune mediated side effects are seen only in 9% of patients, 7% discontinued and 0% death. So it is a very safe option. In fact, I would say it is safer than chemotherapy, although it has a different side effect profile. So there is one more interesting regimen which has been tried in the frontline setting. The paper has not been published yet, but the data was very, very impressive, and it was presented in ASCO 2020. What they have done, the Checkmate 142 has a frontline cohort also, and this gets low dose ipilimumab, that is 1 mg per kg every 6 weeks, with nivolumab 3 mg per kg every 2 weeks, and this has the most impressive results out of all the regimens. Although it is not a phase 3 trial, there is a 13% complete remission rate. So if you compare it to pembrolizumab, the remission rate is around double. The CR rate is around double. 74% PFS at 2 years, 79% survival at 2 years, and only 7%. So it is not even more toxic. Only 7% drug discontinuation due to adverse events. So the phase 3 trial for this is ongoing, but I think the result, I expect them to be really practice changing. So conclusion from these frontline trials, I believe that frontline immunotherapy in DMMR or MSI high advanced colorectal cancer improves outcome dramatically versus chemotherapy, with higher response rate PFS, the OS data being immature and lower toxicity, and durable long-term survival in stage 4 colon cancer, which has not been considered a possibility, is now a very, very real possibility. In fact, I would say probably cure of these tumors is a very real possibility for future. And I feel that nivolumab, ipilimumab might be a very good regimen. There is no phase 3 trial, but we can wait for the data And I think the data is expected to be very promising. So when a drug does very well in palliative trials, obviously the next step is to shift it to adjuvant or neoadjuvant setting. And there has been an effort, just a pilot study, to look at these drugs in the neoadjuvant setting. So this paper was published in Nature Medicine. It was first presented in ESMO 2018 and generated a lot of buzz. So what they have done is that they have taken DMMR patients and proficient, so normal patients and MSI and MMR deficient patients, and both were treated with ipilimumab and nivolumab. So they have just given 4 weeks of therapy, 1 dose ipilimumab and 2 doses of nivolumab, and same for the proficient MMR. So what they found at the time of surgery is that patients who have got MMR deficiency, all 20 patients developed a pathological response. In fact, 19 out of 20 patients had a major pathological response, meaning that 90% of the tumor in the resected specimen had been necrosed. Only 10% or less than 10% residual tumor was left. In fact, 12% patient had a pathological complete response, meaning that just with 2 doses of immunotherapy, the tumor had completely vanished and there was no residual tumor in the surgical specimen. Interestingly, even the patient who had got proficient MMR, 4 out of 15 patients managed to achieve some response, and 1 out of 15 achieved a major pathological response. So what I conclude from this study is that such a high response rate is almost definitely going to translate into improved clinical outcomes, and I think the study makes a strong rationale for conducting studies in the neoadjuvant or adjuvant setting. So 60% pathological CR is very difficult to get in any tumor, and 95% major pathological response these are very, very high numbers. And very interesting that even 1/4 proficient MMR patients show pathological response. I have not shared the data, but there are some studies of immunotherapy as single agent in MMR proficient tumors, and the data says that the response rate is less than 2%. So 25% pathological response is interesting, and it may point to a supposition which is seen in all tumors, that immuno-oncology may be more active in the neoadjuvant setting. That is, instead of treating in the palliative setting, it is better to use immunotherapy in the adjuvant or neoadjuvant setting. So multiple trials are still ongoing. We should see the result of these studies in the next 2 or 3 years. But I think this hypothesis is very, very interesting. Excuse me. So what about non-colorectal cancer patients? So we had discussed in the beginning that MSI is not just a feature of colorectal cancer, and a lot of tumors have got MSI high or deficient MMR. So there is this Keynote 158 study where they have looked at the efficacy of Keytruda in patients with non-colorectal DMMR or MSI high patients, and they have taken patients who have non-colorectal cancer and received Keytruda every 3 weeks for 2 years or until disease progression. So I will just go over the study characteristics. So this is very important. The majority of patients had endometrial cancer followed by gastric cancer. So we had discussed earlier that most common tumors with MSI are endometrial, gastric, and colon. So here also you can see the same thing. Around 22 cholangiocarcinoma patients, that is 10%, pancreatic, small intestine, ovary, brain, sarcoma, and neuroendocrine tumors. So you can see the list of tumors. I will discuss the individual response also. And majority of these patients had received 2 or more lines of therapy. So you can see around 1/3 patient received 1 prior line, and so forth. So overall, they have represented 27 different tumor types. I have only shown the most common tumor types here. And at a median follow-up of around 1 year, they found a response rate of around 34%, which is similar to that of single agent nivolumab. And if you look at the disease control rate, the disease control rate is around 60%. So around 40% patient had progressive disease, which is little bit less impressive than the result we have seen in colon cancer. But you have to remember it is a heterogeneous population. So if you look at it by the tumor type, I just want to show you some interesting things. So first is that endometrial cancer, the result is very impressive. In fact, I would say it is equal or better than colon cancer. There is a 60% response rate in endometrial cancer, which is as cancer with the best doublet regimen, and the median PFS of around 2 years, that is 25.7 months, which is an impressive number in the second or third line setting. Gastric cancer and cholangiocarcinoma, also have good response rates of around 45% and 40%. But important, but importantly, you can see that even MSI high pancreatic cancer, the response rate is not very good. There is only out of 22 patients, there is only one CR and 3 PR with a response rate of 18.2%. And even among the responders, the duration of response is less. It is only 13.4 months. So it points to, even though, these are MSI high tumors, the result, although it is quite impressive, but it is not as good as other tumors, which indicates that there is some genetic heterogeneity between tumor types. Just because a tumor is MSI high does not mean it will respond as well as colon cancer, and different tumor will respond to different amounts. One very important thing, brain tumor, 0% response rate. So they have 13 patients with MSI high brain tumor, and the response rate is 0%. So generally, the PD-1 antibodies find it difficult to cross the blood-brain barrier, but the activated lymphocytes are able to do that. And in studies of nivolumab and ipilimumab, if you look at melanoma studies and some lung cancer studies, the combination checkpoint inhibitor has been able to produce responses in the brain, while responses from single agent are relatively less common. So what I would conclude from this is that the brain tumors are much less sensitive, even if they are MSI high, to at least the single agent pembrolizumab, and maybe they need a different approach. Maybe they need a combination approach. Of course, that will need to be tested out in a study. I will discuss ahead. Brain tumors are still not optimally targetable by immunotherapy, even if they are MSI high. In other studies also, the result with brain tumor has not been very promising. So it is not fun to get a brain tumor, even if it is MSI high. And you can see so this is only the patient who responded. So this is not PFS. And you can see that even at 2 years, almost 80% of patients have an ongoing response. The PFS curves are not as impressive as those seen with colon cancer. But like I mentioned before, you have to remember that this is a heterogeneous population. Probably among these patients with uterine or stomach cancer are doing very well, while patients with brain or pancreatic cancer are doing very badly. So the data need to be taken in that context. So you can see again around the 12-month mark, the plateau starts, and after that the tumors remain in the plateau, and similar is seen with the overall survival. So my third conclusion, patient who have got defective MMR or MSI high non-colorectal cancer treated with pembrolizumab have high disease control rate, a durable disease control, with 3/4 of responses being durable, and response rates, although they vary by tumor type, they are generally durable. Important thing, CNS tumors appear not to have good responsiveness to pembrolizumab. Okay, so let us come to the second topic of our presentation, that is tumor mutation burden. So why do we need something like tumor mutation burden? So what is the biggest problem with immunotherapy today? We need a robust predictive biomarker. For example, when we get a patient with lung cancer, we can offer the patient pembrolizumab or nivolumab, but always we have to tell the patient that the response only occurs in 30 to 40% of patients. So the question which we need to ask is why the response is less. The problem is we are failing to capture the right population. There has to be a population which has got a higher response to these drugs, and ideally, just like for example, suppose you have got osimertinib for EGFR positive. Ideally, we should be able to tease out the immunosensitive population and treat them with immunotherapy. So PD-L1 is the most common immune biomarker which is used in clinical practice. So many tumors like lung, breast, bladder, gastric, head and neck, you must have seen that there is strong correlation with, so not strong, but reasonable correlation with PD-L1. But problem is it is a flawed marker. It is not a good marker. It is predictive in some settings and non-predictive in others. So it is a flawed and unreliable marker. So patient who does not have PD-L1 might respond to immunotherapy, while patient who has 100% PD-L1 may not respond. So it is ultimately not a good marker. So there has been a lot of work going on into a new generation of predictive markers. So some examples are TMB, which I will discuss, tumor infiltrating lymphocyte counts, which can be counted by doing an H&E staining under the microscope, CD8 by IHC. So you can do IHC staining and look for CD8, which are T killer cells, and inflamed or hot T cell GEP. So this is a gene expression profiling signature, which shows that T cells are activated and able to attack the tumor. So here we are going to discuss about TMB. So what is the logic behind TMB? So we had discussed in the drawing before that since immunosensitivity of MSI is ultimately due to hypermutation, then why not just test for hypermutation? So the idea of TMB is you check for high level of mutation in the tumor. More the mutations, more the chance of cancer neoantigens, more the chance of immune response. So, for example, you can see from here. So, there are various mutations occurring in the tumor, which could be due to various reasons, either MMR mutations, familial, age-related, which in turn leads to increased abnormal proteins due to these somatic mutations, which can be recognized by the immune system and be targeted by combination or monotherapy immune checkpoint blockade. So, before we go into the benefit and problem of TMB, I just want to say that TMB has shown its predictive value in number of studies. So you can see there is a huge number of studies here, and all of these studies they have looked at TMB by various modalities, and all of them have found that TMB does predict to some extent whether patient will respond to immunotherapy or not. So in some studies it predicts the response rate, in some it predicts the PFS, in some it predicts the OS. But you see the problem: the benefit is not predictable, the cutoff is not predictable, the method is used differently, and even within the same tumor type, there are different cutoffs and different methods. So these are some problems with TMB which we have to overcome over time, which I will discuss in the coming few slides. So first, let us talk about the calculation of TMB. So the gold standard for calculation tumor mutation burden is whole exome sequencing. So whole exome sequencing, although it is less widely used due to the higher cost, what it does, it calculates the total number of mutations in the tumor exome, and it represents approximately 30 megabase pairs of tumor DNA. And what they do is you take the germline, that is the non-tumor exome, from the blood sample, and you subtract it to get the total TMB. So it is expressed as a total TMB. The value is given as total TMB. For example, in this table, you can see that so 178 mutations per exome. So that is the total TMB based on whole exome sequencing. And it is expressed as numbers like 230, 300, etc. The other way of calculating TMB is using coding regions from large targeted gene panel. So what you do, suppose you have got a large targeted gene panel which is sequencing 300, 400, 500 genes. You can just look at the coding regions within the genome, and you can divide to find out the number of mutations per megabase. So for example, in Foundation 1, which is done by which is the CDX panel done in the United States, they use 0.8 megabase pair of information from 324 genes, and the germline genome, which was supposed to subtract, they estimate by using bioinformatics. So they use a pooled normal genome and they subtract. The MSK, in fact, which is used in MSKCC, they use 1.22 megabase pairs and 468 genes, and they take the patient's blood sample and subtract the germline genome. So this kind of gene panel is expressed as mutations per megabase pair. Example, 10 mutation, 20 mutation per megabase pair. So approximate correlation is 200 TMB per exome correlates to 10 mutations per megabase. If we look at Foundation 1 CDX, the number varies slightly based on the panel. So what is the distribution of TMB in various cancers? The highest TMB is seen in mutagen associated cancer. So for example, skin cancer occurs due to UV damage, it has got high TMB. Lung cancer occurs due to smoking, it has associated high TMB. Cervical cancer, oral cancer, again they have higher TMB. It is higher in older age. So pediatric cancer, usually the mutation burden is low, and usually these are low TMB tumors. And also by cancer type. So I will just show you this graph and explain. So you can see here that TMB grossly varies by tumor type, and what they have presented here is all the tumors with more than 10. So these are tumors where the average TMB is more than 10 mutation per megabase. So it is a complicated list, but I'll just simplify it. The highest TMB is in skin cancers, followed by lung cancer, followed by bladder cancer, followed by uterine cancer, followed by various squamous cancers. So we've got head and neck squamous cancer, cervical cancer, and others like esophagus, anus, vulva, etc. So these are the patients which have the highest TMB in general. So some question which arise when we talk about TMB, one question, do all MSI high patients have high TMB? So very important, MSI high patients usually because of a genomic instability, the TMB in these patients is high. Among MSI high tumors, 97% have TMB of more than 10 per megabase and 83% have TMB of more than 20 per megabase. So in MSI high patients, you can see from this graph, the majority have high TMB, but it is not 100% phenomenon. There will be a small percentage of patients which have got intermediate or low TMB. On the other hand, among TMB high tumors, only 16% are MSI high. So TMB is a larger term which encapsulates more information than MSI. For example, you might have a patient with melanoma who may have very high TMB but may not be MSI. So not every TMB patient is MSI. One more question, does TMB lead to high PDL1? So across a number of trials, so it's very important, TMB and PDL1 produce independent prognostic and predictive information. Across a number of trials, TMB has an independent predictive value. So every patient with high TMB does not have high PDL1 and every patient with low TMB does not have low PDL1. But what has been seen is, suppose somebody has PDL1 positive tumor, if they have high TMB, the response rate is higher compared to PDL1 positive patient with low TMB. So it indicates that likely these are independent predictive entities and you need to use them together. So one question which comes to mind is, what is the right cutoff? So the problem is the TMB cutoff is not clear. The TMB cutoff, these things need to be standardized. In various studies, various TMB cutoffs have been used. You can see, in general, the same problem which is there with PDL1, there is similar problem is there with TMB, meaning that like in PDL1, there are a number of platforms which all perform differently. Same with TMB, there is a number of platforms that perform differently. PDL1, different tumor, there are different cutoffs. Even same tumor, there are different cutoffs. Same with TMB, different tumor, different cutoff. Even in the same tumor, different cutoff. So this is something which needs to be standardized, and I think the way ahead is to find a way to standardize these cutoffs so that we can find a better way to utilize these biomarkers, not just TMB, even PDL1 and other biomarkers. So what I'm going to present now is the TMB subset of the phase 2 Keynote 158 study. So this is a very important study and it has resulted in FDA approval of TMB for treatment of relapse refractory solid tumors. And what they have done here, it is a prospectively defined, very important, biomarker analysis of phase 2 study in infrequent tumor types. So they have 10 predefined cohort and patient had to have at least one line of therapy. And very important, if the patient had brain mets, they have excluded. If they are active, only inactive were permitted. And brain tumors were excluded from the study. Like we discussed earlier, the response is not good, so they have just decided to exclude. And these are the 10 tumor types in this study: anal, biliary, cervical, endometrial, mesothelioma, neuroendocrine, salivary, small cell lung, thyroid, and vulvar. So important is biliary, they could not find any TMB high patient. So it is 0 in this study. And other factors, majority of patients are 0 or 1 ECOG, 6% have stable brain mets, so small number. 2/3 are PDL1 positive, 1/3 negative roughly, and around 14% in the high TMB are MSI high, while in the non-TMB of 688 patients, there is no MSI high patient. And majority of patients have received either 1 or 2 lines of therapy. So this is the waterfall plot for this study. And so I will just make sense of it. So the blue one is TMB high patients. And you can see the response rate, that is more than 30% reduction, is 29% and 14% patient with stable disease. On the other hand, patients who are not TMB high, the response rate is only 6% and 33% had stable disease. And the nice thing about this study is they have 3 years of follow-up data. And you can see what they have shown is that, again, they have shown the 1-year blood group. So what they have shown is that if patient is TMB high, at 1 year, the high TMB patient, 26% patient are progression free, while it is only 13% for non-TMB high. And at 2 years, the number is almost same. It is 22%, while non-TMB continues to decline and reaches 7%. Overall survival curves in the initial part, they have overlap, but maybe because of second and third line therapy. But so at 1 year, the results are similar, but the curves have started separating at 2 years and 3 years. At 2 years, the overall survival is 34 versus 30%. And at 3 years, it is 32% versus 22%, a difference of 10%, which is quite useful and quite significant. So what they have demonstrated that if you treat high TMB patients with immunotherapy, there is a survival benefit compared to low TMB patients. So one important thing I want to put forward is that, again, like I had shown you in the previous study with MSI, the tumor subtype matters a lot. So for example, you can see, although there is a response in the total population, there are some tumors like thyroid, small cell, salivary, neuroendocrine, endometrial and cervical, where the difference is quite apparent. While there are other tumors like anal, in fact, you can see that the curves are, although the number is small, but you can see that the only 1 out of 14 patients with high TMB in anal cancer have actually responded to therapy. So on the other hand, 8 out of 75 with low TMB have responded. Similarly, biliary, they did not have any patients, so they could not capture the information. Mesothelioma, they had only 1 patient, they could not capture. Even so, what I want to reinforce that tumor type seems to be important, not just TMB. So we will discuss the consequence of this fact moving forward. So it has been FDA approved for adults and children with. So what FDA has done in August, they have approved Keytruda for patients with high TMB solid tumors. But you read the language very carefully. The approval is in patients who have progressed following prior treatment and who have no satisfactory alternative treatment option. So this study has a lot of limitations. It is not in a broad cohort. Mostly it is in a group of 10 rare cancers. And even in them, some of the cohorts have got very few patients. So FDA has recognized the limitation of the study. And the approval is only for patients with no other satisfactory treatment. And of course, this study and even the biomarker has been extensively criticized. You can read n number of paper online as well as commentary where people are saying TMB is not ready for the clinic. So the common issues that people mention is that the cutoff is not clear. It is not reproducible test. Different lab will have different cutoff. It is the prognostic predictive value is not well proven. The TMB may not be calculatable in every patient. In some patient, you will not be able to calculate TMB. The sample storage time may affect the result and the high turnaround time. So I will just briefly summarize what are the problems with TMB before it can be used put to widespread use. So number one problem is lack of standardization. So the TMB cutoff varies by tumor type and endpoint, and it is difficult to pinpoint one particular TMB. So very important, TMB alone does not decide immunosensitivity. Patient with low TMB can respond, patient with high TMB may not respond. In fact, the 10 mutation per megabase, which they have taken in the 158 study, it is an arbitrary figure. It does not distinguish a responder from a non-responder. And the second problem is the need for standardization. So, like I said, it differs. Even the bioinformatic pathway used in the machine will change the TMB value. In fact, TMB level by different tests many times don't match. For example, a tumor with TMB more than 10 in Foundation 1 might have TMB of cutoff of 7 in MSK impact. So there are some problems with validation. Number two, and very important, all mutation are not equal. So if you are just calculating TMB, you are thinking ki mutation in X gene is equal to mutation in Y gene. You are just doing maths. You are calculating total mutation and dividing by megabase pairs, and it is wrong. So what has been seen is that mutation affecting the immune system. So there are mutations which affect the antigen processing system or immune system. And even if this patient has 100% TMB, these patients will not have a response. In fact, what has been seen in the genes like STIC11, JAK192, beta-2 bacteriosis, and SERPIN-B3 and SERPIN-B4, which are all involved in antigen presentation or immune system activation. These mutations obviate the ability of the immune system to respond, and these patients often don't respond to immunotherapy. In fact, the reverse is also true. Some mutations are there which form high quality antigen. So one may have 10 mutations causing a low quality antigen, or one may have a single mutation causing a high quality antigen, which will shift the direction of the immune response. So some tumors with very low with low or medium TMB, they have got very good immune responses. For example, Merkel cell carcinoma, you saw the list which I showed. It is not in the top tumors, but it has got one of the highest responses to immunotherapy. Same RCC and mesothelioma, generally the average TMB is less than 10. But the hypothesis is that the mutations are few, but they are high quality mutations, which lead to high immunosensitivity. So some mutation types like frame shift mutation, they produce higher number of neoantigen, lead to strong immune response. So TMB alone does not decide immunosensitivity. The quality of mutation is important, not just the number of mutations. So my conclusion is that although TMB represents a promising new modality, we are getting started. So we need to work and figure out what is the right way to identify immunosensitive patients. The approval of pembrolizumab, although a lot of people may criticize it or call it controversial, I think it is the first step in the right direction. Until you start by putting your foot over a cutoff, you cannot move forward. And FDA has indicated that for patients who have no other option, at least somebody who has more than 10 megabase, 10 mutations per megabase, they are candidates for immunotherapy drugs. So all mutations are not equal, and in fact, it complements other biomarker like PD-L1 or GEP and does not replace them. So, but I feel in future there might be a complex algorithm utilizing multiple biomarkers. In fact, that may represent the holy grail for immunosensitivity. So, thank you very much, and I hope it was useful to everybody. I think we can take some questions, Mr. Srinivas.
Well, thank you, Dr. Vineet, for a wonderful presentation and talk, giving all the details about starting from MSI and MMR, what is MSI, MMR, and then you went through the different techniques for evaluation for the MSI, basically IHCs, PCRs, and NGS. And then you went on to explain about various studies, including the Checkmate 142 and the Keynote 177, the pros and cons of this trials, and also highlighted the impact of MSI in neoadjuvant settings. The best part was that its utility in the non-colorectal cancer was also highlighted, which is, I think, a very important area which you touched upon. Coming down to TMB, very aptly brought about the various studies which are being done in various settings about the cutoffs for TMB being 10 or variation in the different laboratories having variations in cutoff, and also the different kinds of technologies supporting them, whether it will be a whole exome sequencing or a small genome, small gene panels, and how the variations vary, the cutoff vary from technique to technique and panels to panel. We have a few questions, Dr. Vineet, and I would like to request you to please address them. First question from Dr. Shrikant Reddy is, could you please tell if MSI as a predictive marker is generally applicable to which kinds of cancers?
Okay. So yeah, so like I discussed, it is, so there are some cancers where MSI has been, the benefit of MSI in predicting the response to immunotherapy has been better characterized. The most important, of course, is colorectal cancer. But even in uterine cancer and gastric cancer, there seem to be reasonable amount of data which shows that it is a good biomarker for predicting the response to immunotherapy. The data is less for other cancers, like we had discussed the study with pembrolizumab. So just because the tumor is MSI high does not mean it will have as good a response as to colon cancer. So I would say the predictive value varies from tumor to tumor. For some of them, the data is more strong. For some, it is less strong. But other than, I would say, probably brain tumors, majority of patients, there seem to be a reasonable chance of response to immunotherapy if they are MSI high.
Thank you, Dr. Vineet. The second question is, TMB is calculated like mutation detected or through germline mutation. As many labs do not collect blood samples, how is it calculated?
Okay, so for many labs, it is calculated by bioinformatics. So what you need to do is you need to subtract the model genome from the tumor genome. And so even for a very well-established lab like Foundation One, so for TMB calculation, their algorithm does not use a germline sample. They only use the tumor sample. So it is done by bioinformatics. It is not, what they do is they subtract the model genome.
Thank you, doctor. Next question from Dr. Vidya is asking, do you recommend reflex testing by PCR for MSI values scored on NGS?
Okay. So like I showed in this slide, the predictive value for MSI is quite high. It is more than 90%. So at present, I don't do reflex PCR, but what I do is sometimes if the clinical response is not the way I expect, I might do testing by some other method. So for example, patient who might be MSI might be have deficient MMR by IHC, and I have given immunotherapy. I might and the immunotherapy has not responded well. I might do reflex testing by PCR to look for phenotypic evidence.
Another similar question, doctor, is that is there a test available for MMR detection, or MSI and MMR are same, or are they different, or is it same?
Could you go over the question again?
The doctor question is that the MSI and MMR are one and the same, or are they different tests?
No. So MSI is a different test and MMR is a different test. So MMR is the mismatch repair DNA repair pathway, and testing for MMR is usually done by IHC. So what you do is we look for the proteins which are involved in DNA repair. So the DNA repair pathway is mismatch repair or MMR, and the consequence of defective MMR is called MSI. So microsatellite instability is a phenotypic correlation of a genomic defect. So they are related terms, one lead to the other, but they are not the same term.
Thank you, doctor. Another question which talks about the technology. Is whole exome sequencing a gold standard technology? And if so, tests like TMB and MSI, what are the sensitivity and specificity of testing in this technology, in whole exome sequencing?
Okay. So the testing by NGS platforms test where they are not using whole exome sequencing. That is, they are determining the TMB from a surrogate population, from a surrogate number of genes. The sensitivity is definitely the sensitivity and specificity is lower than whole exome, and the value of TMB might have some degree of inaccuracy. In fact, the more the genes you process, the more accurate your TMB is going to be. Okay? But in general, the correlation is quite good above a certain cutoff. And these tests like Foundation One or MSK Impact have even been validated, and the TMB correlation has been found to be well in excess of 90%. So it is generally understood that these are good surrogates. It is not necessary to use whole exome sequencing for every case. Although if whole exome sequencing becomes more commonplace and more affordable, it might be used much more often.
That's helpful to know, sir. So end of the day, if the whole exome sequencing is available at an affordable cost, it's recommended that it be done.
Yes, so it would be preferable. If it is available at affordable cost, definitely it would be a better option.
Thank you, sir. Doctor, another question is that can TMB values differ in patients of same tumor type in different ethnicities?
Yes, of course. Even in two patients of same ethnicity, the TMB value can differ. So suppose two patients of the same ethnicity have got the same lung cancer, you will have different TMB in different patients. So definitely there will be a difference even in ethnicity, since this is called tumor heterogeneity. So every patient will not have the same kind of tumor, and there will be difference from patient to patient.
Great. A question from Mr. Giridharan Periaswamy says, MSI and TMB related immunotherapy success rate is still challenging. How do we improve this? And what do you think about combining cell therapy, that is T cell activated or dendritic cell based, using cancer related neopeptides?
Okay. So there are two questions here. One is the question of what we can do to improve the biomarker. So I think what I feel, my perception is that we need to combine the biomarker. I think the problem which we are facing is that we need to see is both the number of mutation and the quality of mutation. So my feeling is that ultimately what we need is a more comprehensive biomarker which arises from a combination of multiple biomarkers, which takes into account things like it might take into account PDL1, gene expression profiling, types of mutation, etc. So I think this kind of biomarker will come out. This kind of algorithm or this kind of biomarker will come out over some time, and it will improve our predictive value. But I think it is a marathon, not a sprint. I think it will take some time to find the perfect biomarker. Immunotherapy has been there for almost 10 years and we are still struggling to find the perfect biomarker. But I think big data and bioinformatics will help to find the perfect biomarker. That's what I think. The second question is about cellular therapy. So I think cellular therapies are very promising for treatment of various cancers. But the problem is that a lot of these therapies, the idealized way to utilize these therapies is not available in our country. It requires huge investment and infrastructure. For example, if we talk about CAR T cell therapy, although it has been available in the West for last 2 or 3 years, in India, the road has just started. Recently, the joint project between IIT and Tata Memorial has demonstrated immunogenicity of their lab-produced CAR T cells, and now they will start the work on actual clinical trial validation. So it requires a lot of infrastructure and lot of research, lot of work in basic science to develop good cellular therapies. As of now, I would say they are not, most of them are not ready for the clinic, but I think this thing will change very rapidly.
Wonderful, sir. Doctor, another question again pertaining to tumor staging. Please tell us what were the stages and manifestations of cancer at the time of nivolumab plus ipilimumab cohort treatment. Again, the second part is, does tumor staging plays role in patient response?
Yes, absolutely. So like we discussed, so most of the studies which I've shown you today are all for stage 4, except for the one study where they have taken neoadjuvant nivolumab and ipilimumab. Almost all the studies are in stage 4. So what the paradigm seems to be developing for immunotherapy is that most likely immunotherapy is expected to be more effective at earlier stages, and rather than being used in the palliative setting. So of course, a lot of work is going on. It is still too early to say how things will change. But my expectation is that over time, immunotherapy will be used at earlier stages to achieve longer survival and better cure rate in localized. So that is why I'm saying, so to answer your second question, does stage affect the immune response? Definitely stage affects the immune response. The burden of cancer and the mutational diversity of the tumor in the body affects the immune response. So in general, it is believed that earlier stages are more immunosensitive as compared to later stages of it.
Thank you, sir. So a question which has come in connection with the first part of your answer is that does a combination therapy of immunotherapy with the chemotherapy have a better response as against to single agent immunotherapy alone? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there is a lot of data in this direction actually. So actually, there is a lot of work being done and a lot of hypothesis also in this direction. What the idea is that if you give immunotherapy with chemo or radiation, what happens is when you kill a cancer cell, it releases antigens into the bloodstream. And when the immune system is activated in the presence of these antigens, it primes the immune system for better response. So the idea is basically that in some tumors, it is better to give chemoimmunotherapy or radiation in combination with immunotherapy or as compared to immunotherapy alone, but it is not true for every tumor. So ultimately, we will have to determine for which tumor and which setting it is true and not true on one-on-one basis. That is what is required.
Wonderful, sir. Thank you so much. Are there any is there any role of these markers in hereditary cancers?
I'm not sure whether TMB changes anything for a hereditary cancer. Generally, there are some hereditary cancer syndrome which are marked by a high frequency of mutation. So these patients will have got higher TMB. Other than Lynch syndrome, generally MSI is not a hallmark of any other hereditary cancer syndrome. Although sometimes what might happen is that some cancer syndromes may result in mutation of the DNA repair proteins, which lead to secondary MSI. So that can also happen. So although these markers are generally, other than MSI, these markers are not used for diagnosis of hereditary cancer syndrome, but they could be associated with it.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. The similar question was that would you recommend for a PDL1, TMB, and MSI to be done for a same patient? Would it be a better selection of treatment based upon the results from a combination of all three markers?
Okay. So I think it depends on the setting. For example, suppose you have got a lung cancer patient who has failed platinum-based doublet. So in fact, I feel that in the second line setting, your treatment and they have no, suppose you have done the genomic testing and there is no targeted therapy available for these patients. So for them, in fact, I think PDL1 also is not important because you can't treat them without PDL1 and there is actually no better option than immunotherapy. In this setting, you can give them nivolumab or atezolizumab without even testing for PDL1. On the other hand, suppose you have got multiple treatment options in a patient and the picture is not clear which treatment option is better and which treatment option is worse. In this case, I would say the more biomarkers you have, it might inform your decision a little bit better. But of course, it depends on the tumor and the setting.
Thank you, sir. I think last couple of questions which you could take probably, sir. Would a checkpoint with a combination of checkpoint inhibitors with NK cell therapy give a better results?
Okay, so again, like we discussed about cellular therapies before, so these are still experimental therapies and they have not been validated in any large cohorts. Many of these technologies are still in the lab. And although NK cell therapy has been used in some form for many decades actually. If you look at the old paper, you will get NK therapy paper even in 1980s and 1990s. But actually these unprimed NK cells actually fail to control the tumor. So probably what is required is something, some kind of intervention or some kind of modification or activation of the cell so that they can actually be directed and used for tumor cell killing. And I think that is first a subject for basic research and then a subject for translational research. So I have no doubt that these therapies will come up over time, but we need to figure out how to use these therapies in a proper way so that actually you are achieving something by using this costly therapy rather than just a false assurance that it might be helping the patient.
I agree, sir.
It might come up over time, but for now, no.
I agree. So one final question, since the results of PDL1 are so varying based upon the clone which is used and then it is not applicable across the organs, is it viable to use just an MSI and PDL1 to decide in immunotherapy, or the MSI and TMB to decide upon immunotherapy?
No, so like I have discussed, so actually I will tell you, so PDL1 is tested by IHC and PDL1 is a characteristic, it is a phenotypic characteristic of the tumor cells interaction with the immune system. While TMB is a genotypic characteristic of the degree of mutation in the tumor. So like we had discussed in the previous slide, I think both these biomarkers are important. It is not just one biomarker. You need both of them. And ideally, you should make the decision using both biomarkers. For example, if you give me a lung cancer patient, I would definitely not be happy just making a decision based on TMB. And I would definitely want to know the PDL. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Vineet, for this excellent interaction and and answering the questions. I believe that the questions were apt and the answers have been very, very aptly answered. I think that's all the time which we are. In fact, we have exceeded the time limit. On behalf of 4BaseK Genomics, I thank you, Dr. Gupta, for this extremely enlightening and a wonderful talk. I thank you all the participants for sparing your valuable time to attending the sessions. You have always been a great source of motivation and have encouraged us to bring these sessions to you. We look forward for your participation in future sessions as well. Good night and have a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you for this.